And about that same period, this was already 1948, and Israel had just become a state, thanks to a wonderful President Truman, whom I think was the best president of all times. That's my feeling anyway. And since Israel had become a state, they sent a lot of I don't know what they call them, missionaries or men from Israel went to Europe, and there was a huge, tremendous amount of propaganda. They wanted the youth to come to Israel, to go to Israel, to build Israel, and to live in a free state among all Jews, and the propaganda was huge. When I was home and he was there and we were alone, it was great. When I was all by myself, the thoughts would go through my mind, and I lived a horror. I mean, it was just a horror in my life. When we were all together, the four of us eating dinner or lunch or whatever, it was again a horror. But the worst of all were the nights, the evenings, when I went into my bedroom alone, and I knew he was with her, and of course there was not a goddamn thing I could do about it. But as time went by, my feelings of desperation grew more and more, and more my thought was to get away from that environment. I couldn't cope anymore. I didn't know where to go. My father at that time came to this country, and he was here already, and I don't know, he had not settled here, and things were bad at the beginning for him in this country, so there was no point in me asking to go there. All I know is that the situation at home under those circumstances were unbearable, unreal, so that there was a lot of advertisement of a lot of small Jewish organizations being built up where youth was called for. And I joined one where the ages were anywhere between 13 and 18 or 19. It was called, I forgot the name, Mizrahi something. It was a religious Jewish group, but then they all were. And even though we were not religious at home at that period, the only 2 times we went to synagogue was Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But most of the Jewish organizations for the youth were religious. So I decided to join one of those, and I became active, and we listened to a lot of Israeli speakers who talked beautifully, who explained the need for all of the youth to move to Israel. They did not just want the youth, they wanted all Jews to immigrate there where they really belonged. But mostly they directed their speeches to the youth. And the group I belonged to, there were about 200 of us, and I became active immediately. But it seems that throughout my life, whenever I ever undertook anything or joined anything, I always went into it wholeheartedly. It was either being completely active and in it or nothing at all. I just never paid dues for anything. I had to be on the board of everything. This is my pattern in life. I always did that. So I became very active, but not so much feeling that I was a Zionist at all. I never felt it. It was just to get away from my environment at home that was so difficult to cope with. I was definitely in love with Maurice by then. Toward my mother, it was not hate anymore. I felt it was guilt. as far as his son Willie's concerned, I just felt nothing. I probably still hated him. He didn't matter. I never paid much attention to him. But generally speaking, the situation at home became so unbearable. So that toward the end of 1948, I used to come home from those speeches and those lectures, and I said how interested I was and how important it was for young Jews to move to Israel and build Israel. And they all believed, including Maurice, that I became a Zionist. Even to him at the beginning I lied to him. I told him I feel very strongly about it, this and that. And then one day when we were all by ourselves, he says, you don't really mean it. You couldn't leave me. I love you. He's saying this. I love you, Fanny. Don't leave me. You mean more to me than anything. And, oh God, the promises he made. He said that when I'll be 18, 19, he'll divorce my mother and we'll both go away somewhere and we'll end up our lives together. And we'll live together for the rest of our lives. And oh, the promises and the talk. Was he a talker? Oh, he should have been a lawyer. He would have been fantastic. And I'd listened to him, and I kept saying it's impossible. At that time, I was more conscious of the reality of things. I was more of a realist than he was. I knew it would never be feasible. It was just such a vicious circle. How could he possibly speak that way? He's going to divorce my mother, marry me. It's all so ludicrous. What about his son? Am I supposed to be a stepmother of a kid that's 6 years younger than I mean, the whole thing was so ridiculous. So I finally told him the truth, that I can't go on like this. When I'm with him, I'm absolutely crazy about him. I constantly want to be with him. That the nights, it's always a nightmare. I know he's with her. That the whole situation is unbearable, and the best thing I could do is to really go to Israel and join that big group who was leaving. And that would be my survival, my getting out of that atmosphere of horror. It was really a house of horror. And no matter how much he tried to talk me out of it, I persisted. And that's one time I stood on my own grounds, on my own 2 feet. Now the question was my mother. She, of course, since she didn't know anything of what was going on, and all of a sudden I'm talking about going to Israel with the youth group, Aliyah, she says, you're crazy, this is your family here, we've been separated so much already with the war and the years you spent with your foster parents and this and that. She says, you're crazy, you're not going. And then I would say, yes I am, I'm a Zionist, I feel very strongly, and she wouldn't hear of it. Now I had to have her permission. She had to sign papers that it was okay with her. All parents had to sign, unless you were 18 already. So I couldn't she would not sign it, and the papers were laying around for 3 weeks. It was at that time around December of 48, and there was no way out. She just would not sign. So one day, I remember that day very, very vividly. We lived on the 2nd floor. There were like actually the 3rd floor. And when you walked into the apartment, the first room was a big kitchen, and at the end of the kitchen was a big window. There were no screens. Nobody had screens in those years. And I was in the kitchen, and I knew Maurice was not home, and Willie was in school, and I knew that any minute she was going to walk in. And I waited for her, and the papers were on the kitchen table with a pen. I had the whole thing set up in advance, and I hear her come through the door, and as she's coming at the door, I go near the window and I open the window and I sit on the ledge, And she yells, "Be careful, you might fall out, you idiot, what are you doing out there?" And I'm saying to her, "I'm going to sit here and till you sign those papers that are over there. I have to have your permission. I cannot go to Israel with the youth group unless you sign. If you don't sign, I'm jumping." That was the very first time in my life I threatened to commit suicide. Of course, that was not a question of, well, in a way it was a depression of a kind, since I couldn't go on living there. And if she would not have let me go to Israel, I had no choice but to do it. So at the age of 15 and a half, that was my very first time where I spoke of suicide already. And she's trying to con me and say, "Don't be ridiculous," and she's trying to talk me out of it. And she started walking toward me, and I said, "Don't move." Oh, I was so dramatic. I had seen a lot of movies, and I had read a lot of novels. And I said, "Don't you dare move one more step toward me," and I jumped. And I mentioned before, I was a very good actress. And she saw how serious I was. Or she believed how serious I was. Or maybe it showed how serious I was. I don't know. But she looked very scared all of a sudden. And she says to me, "Why is it so bad here? You finally got used to Maurice. You seem to like him very much. We're all getting along with one another. Why this urge to go to Israel? What's going to become of you there all by yourself with 200 other youth? What about your education? What's going to become of you?" And all those questions. And I said to her, "When I get there, I'll worry about all that. I can continue to go to school there." I said, "I feel very strongly Zionistic. Israel needs me. Israel needs youth." I said, "So help me God, if you don't sign, I'm jumping, because I'm not staying another minute in Belgium. There's absolutely nothing, no future here for me." Well, my acting was superb, and she signed all 3 papers, and then I got off the seat of the ledger, of the windowsill, I closed the window, I picked up the 3 papers, and I said to her, "I'll see you later," and I ran over to the headquarters. And right then and there they told me when the day of departure would be. It was March 29, 1949. We were going to leave from Brussels by train to Marseille. In Marseille, all of us were going to wait about a week in a big home of some kind. And then a boat was going to take us to Haifa. And all of us were going to be placed in different towns. I mean, I have no idea what they were going to do with us. I didn't give a damn anyway. All I wanted was to get away from that atmosphere where I lived. So I had won one little victory. And